Hello, night seekers, and welcome to Midnight Scary Storyteller, a place where forgotten tales and gentle voices guide you softly into sleep, wrapped in mystery and shadow. Before tonight's story begins, don't forget to subscribe and tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below. I always love seeing where these midnight stories find their way. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's drift together into the unknown. I received a phone call from my mom on my mobile, and even now, years later, I still do not know what to do with it. It is one of those things that sounds impossible when you try to explain it out loud. People can find explanations for almost anything if they want to. They can say it was a mistaken call, a dream, stress, a glitch, a prank, a memory problem, or some weird moment where my brain filled in details that were not really there. I understand all of that. I know how it sounds. But I also know what happened. I know I answered the phone. I know I heard my mom's voice. I know I heard my dad in the background. I know I reacted like any person would react if they believed their parents were in immediate danger and the call was in my phone afterward. That is the part I always come back to. It started like any normal day. I was not expecting anything strange, and I had no reason to think anything was wrong at my parents' house. Then my phone rang, and it was my mom. I answered, probably expecting a normal conversation, but the second I heard her voice, I knew something was very wrong. She was terrified. She was speaking in a low voice, almost whispering, like she was afraid someone might hear her. I could hear the fear in her breathing. It was not a casual kind of worry. It was the voice of someone trying not to panic, because panicking might make things worse. She told me they were being robbed. Someone had entered the house. She and my dad were upstairs. For a moment, my brain could not catch up to what she was saying. There is a strange delay when you hear something truly frightening over the phone. The words reach you, but they do not feel real at first. Your mind tries to reject them because they do not belong in an ordinary moment. My parents were at home. They should have been safe. My mom should not have been whispering to me from upstairs while someone broke into the house below them. But that was what she was telling me. I could hear my dad in the background too. He was trying to calm her down. I remember that clearly. He sounded tense, but he was doing what dads do in emergencies, trying to hold everything together and keep her from losing control. Then he grabbed the phone, or at least took it from her, and spoke to me. He told me something like, "Call the police." His voice was urgent. He did not stay on the line. He said what he needed to say, and then the call ended. He hung up. For a few seconds, I just stared at my phone. My heart was pounding. I was scared, but I also went into action immediately because there was no time to sit and think. My parents were in the house, someone had broken in, and my dad had told me to call the police. That was all I needed to know. Before calling the police, I called my brother because he lived closer to them. I needed someone physically near the house as fast as possible. When he answered, I told him, "Someone just broke into Mom and Dad's. I'm calling the police. Get over there." He said, "Ok." That was it. No long discussion, no questions. He understood the situation from my voice, and we hung up. Then I called the police. I was in the middle of that call, trying to explain what had happened, when my brother called me back. His call came through while I was already speaking to emergency services. That made my panic worse at first, because I thought maybe he had arrived, or maybe he had heard something else, or maybe he had more information. I answered him. He told me he had just phoned my mom. He said they were fine. At home. Nothing was happening. No robbery, no intruder, no panic. no call. They were just chilling there like it was an ordinary day. I remember the confusion hitting me so hard that it almost felt physical. I could not understand what he was saying. A minute earlier, I had heard my mom whispering in fear. I had heard her say someone was in the house. I had heard my dad in the background. I had heard him take the phone and tell me to call the police. I had called my brother because of it. I was literally in the middle of calling the police because of it. And now my brother was telling me nothing had happened. I asked him what he meant. I tried to make him understand that I had just spoken to them. Not imagined it. Not had a weird feeling. Spoken to them. My mom had called me. I had heard both of them. My dad told me to call the police. The fear in my mom's voice had been real. But my brother had just called them himself, and they were completely normal. They had no idea what he was talking about. They were not hiding upstairs. They were not being robbed. Nobody had entered the house. They had not called me. There had been no emergency at all. That should have been a relief. And in one way it was. My parents were safe. That was what mattered most. But the relief was tangled with something else, something colder and stranger. Because if my parents were safe, then who had called me? Or what had I heard? I checked my phone. The call was there. That is why I cannot fully accept the idea that I dreamed it or imagined it. I was awake. I answered my mobile. I spoke, listened, reacted, called my brother, then called the police. And when I looked, the phone call existed in my call history. It was not something I made up afterward. It was there, a real record of a call from my mom's number. But according to my mom and dad, they had not made it. They were fine. They were calm. They were at home, doing nothing unusual. There was no robbery and no reason for them to call me in fear. I do not know how to explain that. I have thought about every possibility I can think of. Maybe someone spoofed her number. But why? And how would they know enough to sound like my mom and dad? Why create such a specific panic and then disappear? It did not sound like a prank. It was not funny. It was not some stranger trying to mess with me. It was my mom's voice, scared and whispering. It was my dad's voice in the background, then on the phone, telling me to call the police. Maybe it was some kind of crossed line or phone glitch. But that does not explain hearing my parents. It does not explain why the call showed as coming from my mom. It does not explain why the conversation was so direct and urgent. Maybe some other family was being robbed, and somehow their call came through my mom's number. But then, why did the voices sound like my parents? Why did I recognize them instantly? Maybe my mind was under stress and interpreted something wrong. But I was not already panicked before the call. The call created the panic. I did not hear a vague sound and decide it was my mom. I answered her number and heard her voice. The most unsettling possibility is the one I try not to think about too much. What if I heard something that did not happen in our timeline, or did not happen yet, or happened somewhere else? What if it was some kind of echo of an event that could have happened, but did not? What if, in another version of that day, someone did break into their house, and somehow I got the call from that version? I know that sounds ridiculous. I know it sounds like something from a movie. But when the normal explanations do not fit, your mind starts wandering into places it normally would not go. I do not like thinking that way, but the event makes it hard not to. For a long time afterward, I felt strange whenever my mom called. A normal phone ring carried a little extra fear. I would see her name on the screen and remember that other call, the one she said she never made. I would hear her real voice and compare it to the terrified whisper I had heard that day. It was the same voice. I know it was. That is what bothers me most. We never really talked about it again. That was partly because there was nothing useful to say. My parents were fine. The police were not needed. My brother had confirmed there was no emergency. But it was also because talking about it made me feel like I sounded unstable. How do you keep bringing up a phone call that everyone else says never happened, even though it was in your phone? How do you say, "I heard Mom and Dad being robbed," when they were sitting safely at home? How do you explain that without sounding like you have a loose screw? So we let it go. Or at least, we stopped speaking about it. But I did not forget. I still remember my mom's low, frightened voice. I remember the way she sounded like she was trying to stay quiet because someone dangerous was downstairs. I remember hearing my dad trying to calm her. I remember him taking the phone and telling me to call the police. I remember the sudden silence after he hung up. I remember calling my brother and telling him to get over there. I remember calling the police. I remember my brother calling back and saying they were fine, that nothing had happened, that they were just chilling at home. And I remember looking at my phone and seeing the call there. That is the detail that keeps the whole thing from fading into some strange half-memory. If there had been no call record, maybe I could eventually convince myself that something happened in my head. Maybe I had dozed off and dreamed it. Maybe I mixed up a nightmare with real life. Maybe I panicked over nothing. But the call was in my phone, and my reaction to it had been real enough that I called my brother and the police. Something happened. I just do not know what. Maybe there is a technical explanation somewhere. Maybe phones can do strange things. Calls can route badly, numbers can show wrong, and voices can be misidentified when panic hits. Maybe someone with more knowledge of mobile networks could give me a boring answer that would make the whole thing less frightening. I would honestly welcome that. A boring answer would be easier to live with. But the boring answers do not explain the fear in my mom's voice. They do not explain my dad's voice. They do not explain the exact situation they described. They do not explain why my brother called them and found them completely unaware of anything. So the story remains what it is. One of the strangest things that has ever happened to me. A phone call from my mom saying she and my dad were upstairs while someone robbed their house. My dad telling me to call the police. Me doing exactly that. My brother checking on them and finding them safe, calm, and confused. No robbery, no call, nothing, and yet the phone call was there. We never brought it up again because none of us knew how to talk about it without making it worse. But I still think about it sometimes. I think about how real it felt, how urgent it sounded, and how quickly the world split into two versions of the same moment. In one version, my parents were in danger and calling me for help. In the other, they were perfectly fine and had no idea what I was talking about. I live in the second version. But for those few minutes, through that phone call, I swear I heard the first one. Back in the late 1990s, when I was in my 20s, I went to a large electronics convention in a major U.S. city. It was one of those big events with crowds, product showcases, salespeople, banners, booths, and all the noise and movement that comes with a convention hall packed full of people. At the time, it felt like a normal day. I was interested in electronics, the convention sounded exciting, and I expected to spend a few hours walking around, checking out new products, maybe picking up brochures or seeing things I had only read about before. I drove there, found parking, and then walked for a while to get to the venue. That part was already busy, but in the usual way. People were heading in the same direction, some carrying bags, some talking in groups, some already wearing badges. I waited in a brief line to get inside, and after that, I found myself in one of the large convention halls. The scale of it hit me right away. There were people everywhere. Exhibits were set up in rows. Bright displays were flashing, and every booth seemed to have someone trying to pull people in or explain the latest product. It had that loud, busy energy where everything is happening at once. I remember walking through the hall, looking around, probably moving between displays without any real plan. There were open areas between the booths where people crossed paths in every direction. You would brush near strangers, step around groups, slow down when someone stopped in front of you, then speed up again when the space cleared. In a place like that, a little contact with other people is not unusual. Someone bumps your shoulder, someone's bag brushes your leg, someone backs up without looking. You accept it because there are too many people in one space. But this was different. As I walked through one of the open sections between displays, I saw a man come out of the bustle and start walking toward me. He stood out for some reason. Maybe it was the way he was moving. Maybe it was the fact that, even in a crowded convention hall, he seemed focused. He had dark hair, a dark button-down shirt, sunglasses, and he was carrying a jacket folded over his left arm, held against his stomach. His right hand was crossed in front of him under the jacket, mostly hidden. I noticed him because he was not just walking past me, he was veering toward me. It felt intentional. That is the part I remember clearly. In a crowd, people adjust their direction all the time. Most of it is unconscious. You step left, they step right, and everyone keeps going. But this man seemed to choose me. He came out of the flow of people and angled himself directly into my path. There was enough space that he did not need to hit me. He could have moved around. I could tell he saw me. Still, he kept coming. Then he banged into me. It was not a gentle bump. It was forceful enough to make me stop. As he made contact, I felt something scrape across my left forearm. His right hand was still partly hidden under the jacket, but he was holding something in it. Whatever it was, he dragged or scraped it hard across my arm as he hit me. It was not accidental contact from a watch, a bracelet, a badge lanyard, or something swinging from his hand. It felt like an object pressed against my skin with purpose. Then he kept walking. He did not stop. He did not say sorry. He did not even look back. He just moved past me and continued into the crowd like nothing had happened. For a second, I stood there in shock. My brain was trying to understand the sequence of events. A man had walked toward me on purpose, bumped into me, scraped my forearm with something hidden under his jacket, and then kept going without a word. It happened fast, but not so fast that I missed the important details. I saw him. I saw the jacket over his arm. I felt the scrape. I saw him speed walk away after. I turned around and watched him go. He was moving quickly now, faster than a normal convention attendee strolling between booths. He was not running, but he was speed walking into the crowd with clear purpose. That made the whole thing feel even worse. If it had been an accident, he would have at least paused or looked back. Most people, even rude people, react when they collide with someone. But he acted like the collision was the point, and now that it was done, he needed to disappear. I looked down at my arm. At first, I thought I might be bleeding. I expected a cut, a puncture, something obvious. But my arm looked mostly fine. There was no blood, no deep wound, no immediate injury. Still, it had clearly been scraped. There was a white mark on my left forearm, about 1/4 inch wide and maybe 3 inches long. It looked like something had dragged across the skin with enough pressure to leave a visible streak. I was dumbfounded. It was such a strange thing to have happen that I did not know how to react right away. If someone had punched me, I would have understood what happened. If someone had pickpocketed me, maybe I would have checked my wallet. If someone had accidentally bumped into me, I would have been annoyed and moved on. But this felt different. It felt targeted, but I had no idea why. A man I did not know had scraped my arm with something and vanished into a massive crowd. After a moment, the shock turned into anger and fear. I charged after him. I pushed into the crowd in the direction he had gone, scanning for the dark hair, dark shirt, sunglasses, and the jacket folded over his arm. But he was gone. Completely gone. In a crowded convention hall, someone can disappear fast if they know where they are going. There were too many people, too many booths, too many directions he could have taken. One second I had seen him speed walking away, and the next he had vanished into the movement of the crowd like he had never been there. That made my fear spike. Because now I was not just dealing with some random bump. I was dealing with a man who seemed to have intentionally made contact, used some object on my arm, and then disappeared before I could confront him. I did not know what he had scraped me with. I did not know if it was sharp. I did not know if there was something on it. I did not know if he had tried to inject something, poison something, mark me, test something, or simply scare me. My mind started going through every possibility, and none of them were comforting. This was the late 1990s, but people were already aware of dangerous things that could happen in crowds. Needles, drugs, chemicals, weird attacks, urban legends. All of that lived somewhere in the back of people's minds. I did not know what was real and what was exaggerated. But in that moment, standing in a convention hall with a strange mark on my arm, I was not thinking calmly. I was thinking about the hidden object in his hand. I was thinking about how hard he scraped me. I was thinking about how quickly he left. I went straight to the men's room. Once I got there, I washed the hell out of my arm. I washed it again and again, probably a dozen times, for several minutes. I scrubbed the area hard, trying to remove anything that might have been on my skin. Soap, water, more soap, more water. I kept looking at the mark, checking for blood, checking for a puncture, checking for anything that might tell me what had happened. There was no obvious wound, but that did not calm me down much. The scrape was there. I had felt it. Something had touched my arm with force. I remember feeling almost embarrassed by how scared I was, but I could not stop washing it. What else was I supposed to do? I had no idea what the object was. It could have been harmless. Maybe it was a pen, a badge clip, a piece of plastic, or something sticking out from under the jacket. Maybe the man was just rude and awkward and did not realize he had scraped me. But that did not match what I saw. He had veered toward me. He had hidden his hand under the jacket. He had made hard contact. Then he had rushed away without speaking. The more I replayed it, the less accidental it felt. After I washed my arm, I went back out into the convention hall, but the whole event felt different now. The excitement was gone. I tried to look around at a few more exhibits, but I was not really paying attention anymore. The products, displays, lights, and crowds all blurred together. I kept scanning faces, looking for the man. Every person in sunglasses or a dark shirt caught my attention. Every time someone moved too close to me, my body tensed. The convention hall no longer felt like a fun public space. It felt like a place where someone had targeted me and slipped away. I was unsettled and frightened, and I left early. On the way home, I kept thinking about my arm. I wondered if I should go to a doctor. I wondered if I was overreacting. I wondered if I should have reported it to security right away. At the time, I think I was too confused to know what to say. A guy bumped into me and scraped my arm with something sounds strange and vague, especially when there is no blood and no visible serious injury. But that was exactly what had happened, and the fact that it sounded hard to explain only made it more disturbing. I have gone over the details in my head many times. His dark hair, his sunglasses, his dark button-down shirt, the jacket folded over his left arm, held against his stomach, his right hand crossed underneath it, hidden, the way he came out of the crowd and angled toward me. The impact, the scrape across my left forearm, the white mark left behind, the way he kept going without a word, the speed walk into the crowd, the sudden disappearance. I do not know what he was doing. Maybe he was trying to hurt me. Maybe he was practicing something. Maybe he was mentally unstable. Maybe he thought I was someone else. Maybe it was some kind of pickpocket technique gone wrong. Maybe he was carrying something sharp or rough under the jacket and accidentally scraped me when he bumped into me. Maybe the entire thing was a coincidence made worse by my fear. But I cannot shake the feeling that it was intentional. There was something too directed about the way he moved. In a crowded hall, people bump into each other from all angles, but he did not seem randomly pushed into me. He chose a path. He came toward me. He hit me. He scraped my arm with whatever was in his hidden hand. Then, he left fast. That is not how accidents usually feel. What scares me most is the unknown object. If I had seen it clearly, maybe I could explain the whole thing. If it was a key, a pen, a tool, or some piece of convention gear, I might have been able to say, okay, that's what scraped me. But I never saw it clearly. I only knew he had something in his right hand under the jacket, and I felt it drag across my skin. The jacket itself bothered me too. It felt like it was being used to hide the hand. Maybe that is paranoia after the fact. But that was the impression I had. His left arm held the folded jacket against his stomach, and his right hand was crossed beneath it. It was positioned in a way that concealed what he was doing until the moment he made contact. That detail makes the memory feel planned, not random. I never found out who he was. I never found out what he scraped me with. Nothing obvious happened to me afterward, at least nothing I could connect to the incident. I was not injured in any lasting way. I did not get sick from it. The mark faded. Life went on. In practical terms, I was fine. But the experience stayed with me because of how wrong it felt. There is a particular kind of fear that comes from being touched by a stranger in a way that seems purposeful and then having no explanation. It is not like being threatened directly. It is quieter and more confusing. Your body knows something happened, but your mind cannot categorize it. Was it an assault? A mistake? A prank? A failed robbery? Something worse? You are left with a scrape, a memory, and the awful feeling that someone did exactly what they meant to do. The convention had been crowded enough that I should have felt safe. That is what public places do. They make you feel like nothing too strange can happen because there are people everywhere. But that day taught me that crowds can hide people just as easily as they protect you. A man can step out of the bustle, do something quick and bizarre, and vanish before anyone else even notices. I still think about it sometimes. Not constantly, but every now and then, especially when I am in crowded places and someone moves too deliberately toward me. I think about that man in the dark shirt with the sunglasses and the jacket over his arm. I think about the scrape on my forearm and the white mark it left. I think about standing there confused while he disappeared into the crowd. I think about washing my arm over and over in the men's room, trying to scrub away not just whatever might have touched me, but the feeling of being targeted. Maybe there was a harmless explanation. Maybe I will never know. But I know what I felt in that moment. He did not just bump into me. He came toward me, hit me, scraped my arm with something hidden in his hand, and left without a word. And to this day, I still have no idea why. I have had a few experiences where I heard someone call my name, and even though I have tried to explain them in a normal way, they still creep me out. It is not like I saw a figure standing in the room or watched something move by itself. It was only a voice. But sometimes a voice is worse, especially when it sounds like someone you know, and even more when that person is not supposed to be able to call for you. The first voice was my mom's. She said my nickname. It was not a soft whisper or some vague sound that I had to force into meaning. It was loud, clear, urgent, the kind of way someone says your name when they need your attention right now. I heard it so clearly that my body reacted before my brain had time to think. It felt like being called from another room, like someone was standing close enough that they expected me to answer. It had that familiar tone that only someone close to you would use, because a nickname carries a different feeling than your full name. It feels personal. It feels like family. It feels like someone who knows you. That was part of what made it so unsettling. I have not spoken to my mom in almost 6 years, so hearing her voice say my nickname was not comforting. It was jarring. It was like the past had suddenly reached into the room and grabbed me by the shoulder. I was not expecting to hear her. I was not around her. There was no reason for her voice to be in my house, in my head, or anywhere near me. But I heard it anyway, loud and urgent, like she was trying to get me to wake up or pay attention. And sometimes it did wake me up. I mean, out of a dead sleep. That is one of the reasons I tried to find a normal explanation. Waking up to a sound that may or may not have been real is something people talk about. There is something called exploding head syndrome, where people hear loud sounds when they are falling asleep or waking up. Sometimes people describe bangs, crashes, pops, or voices. I looked into that idea because it seemed like it might fit. Maybe my brain was creating the sound as I came out of deep sleep. Maybe it was not a ghost, a message, or anything supernatural. Maybe it was just my mind firing off some random familiar voice at the wrong time. That explanation helps a little, but not completely. Because even if exploding head syndrome can explain hearing a sudden noise, it does not fully explain the feeling of recognition. It does not explain the specific voices. It does not explain why the voice sounded exactly like someone from my life, with the same tone and urgency. It does not explain why my mom would be saying my nickname, or why another time I heard my great aunt say my full name in the exact way only she ever said it. That one may bother me even more. My great aunt has been dead for almost 15 years. She did not call me by a nickname. She used my full name, but the thing that made it so specific was the way she said it. She had this particular emphasis on the first syllable that no one else used. It was one of those tiny personal details that you do not even think about until you hear it again. People can say the same name 1,000 different ways, but certain relatives have their own rhythm, their own pronunciation, their own little habit in how they call you. My great aunt had one of those, and I heard it. Not just my full name, but my full name said with that exact emphasis on the first syllable. Loud, urgent, like she needed me to listen. That is what makes it hard to dismiss as a random sound. If I had only heard someone shout a name that kind of sounded like mine, I could let it go. If I had heard a vague voice while half asleep, I could say my brain was filling in the rest. But this was specific. too specific. It was her voice, her way of saying my name, the way no one else said it, and she has been gone for almost 15 years. I do not know what to do with that. Part of me wants the normal answer. I really do. I am not looking to make every weird thing into something paranormal. I know the brain is strange, especially around sleep. It can create sounds, voices, feelings, and even full conversations in those moments between dreaming and waking. People can hear doorbells, knocks, crashes, names being called, all kinds of things that feel completely real in the moment. It does not mean there is an actual person there. It can be neurological. It can be stress. It can be memory. It can be the mind pulling old sounds from somewhere deep and throwing them into the room. Maybe that is all this is. Maybe my brain stores the voices of people who mattered to me, even complicated people, and sometimes plays them at random when I am sleeping too deeply or waking too suddenly. Maybe because those voices are emotionally charged, they feel urgent. Maybe my mom's voice is tied to old feelings I have not fully processed. Maybe my great-aunt's voice is tied to childhood memories, family, loss, or something buried so deep I do not even know it is there. Maybe my mind uses familiar voices because they are the ones most likely to wake me. That would make sense. But it is still creepy. Because when it happens, it does not feel like a brain glitch. It feels like someone said my name. There is a difference between remembering a voice and hearing it. I can think about my mom's voice anytime. I can remember how my great-aunt said my name if I try. But these moments were not like memory. They came from outside of my thoughts. They broke into the quiet. They had volume. They had force. They had urgency. I did not sit there imagining them. I heard them, and my body responded like someone had called me. That kind of thing reaches into a very old part of you. When someone calls your name loudly, especially in an urgent tone, you react. You wake up. You look around. You answer, or at least almost answer. Your body does not stop to ask whether the voice makes sense. It assumes there is a reason. It assumes someone needs you, or something is wrong, or you are in danger. That is what names do. They cut through sleep. They cut through thought. They pull you toward the person calling. So when the voice belongs to someone who is absent, estranged, or dead, the fear hits after the reaction. First, you wake up. Then you realize the voice should not be there. With my mom, it is complicated because she is alive. But I have not spoken to her in almost 6 years. Hearing her voice say my nickname feels like being dragged backward into a connection that no longer exists in my daily life. It is not the same as hearing the voice of someone dead, but it still feels impossible in its own way. She is not around me. She is not calling me from another room. She is not part of my routine. So why would her voice be the one to wake me? With my great-aunt, the impossibility is more direct. She has been dead for almost 15 years. There is no normal way for her to call my name, and yet I heard her. Not a generic old woman's voice. Not just any family member. Her voice. Her emphasis. Her exact way of saying it. That is the part that stays with me. I keep going back to the detail of the first syllable. It sounds small, but it is not. Those little details are what make a memory feel real. If my brain had made up a random voice, why did it include that? Why did it use the one pronunciation habit only she had? Why did it choose her voice after all these years? Maybe because memory is powerful. Maybe because my brain is more detailed than I realize. Or maybe because it really was her in some way I cannot explain. I do not know. I also do not know why the voices sounded urgent. That bothers me too. They were not calm. They were not sweet, like someone gently saying hello. They sounded like someone trying to get my attention quickly. Like a warning, like a call from another room when something is wrong. That urgency makes the experience feel less like a peaceful visit and more like something trying to break through. But nothing ever seemed to happen afterward. No disaster. No obvious warning that came true. No message I could understand. Just the voice. The shock of hearing it. The cold feeling after I realized who it sounded like. And then nothing. That almost makes it worse, because there is no closure. If I had woken up and found smoke in the house, I could say maybe the voice was a warning. If something important had happened the next day, I might connect it. But it was just the voice, loud enough to wake me, and then silence. Maybe the silence is what makes it linger. After the voice stops, the room feels too quiet. You lie there listening, waiting to hear it again. You wonder if you should answer. You wonder if answering would be stupid, or dangerous, or useless. You wonder if something in the dark is waiting for you to acknowledge it. Then, after a while, the ordinary sounds of the house return, and you try to convince yourself it was nothing. But it does not feel like nothing. I have thought about whether it could be stress. Maybe emotional stress finds old voices to use. Maybe the mind reaches for voices tied to unfinished things. My relationship with my mom is not active anymore. But that does not mean the emotional history disappears. My great aunt is gone, but memory does not die just because people do. Maybe when I am exhausted, my brain pulls from those deep files and throws a voice into the dark because it knows that voice will get through to me. That is probably the most reasonable explanation. Still, it is hard to be fully comforted by it, because whether it is paranormal or psychological, hearing someone who should not be there say your name is disturbing. It makes you feel watched by your own past. It makes you wonder what else your brain is holding on to. It makes you wonder whether the dead are ever really gone, or whether the living people we no longer speak to can still echo inside us loudly enough to wake us. I do not have an answer. I only know what I heard. My mom saying my nickname, loud and urgent, even though I have not spoken to her in almost 6 years. My great aunt saying my full name, with that exact emphasis on the first syllable that only she ever used, even though she has been dead almost 15 years. Both voices clear enough to startle me, clear enough, at times, to wake me from a dead sleep. Maybe it is exploding head syndrome. Maybe it does not have to be a bang or crash. Maybe a voice can count too. Maybe that is all this is, my brain misfiring in the dark, using familiar voices because they are stored somewhere deep and emotional. But even if that is the explanation, it still does not make the moment feel any less creepy. Because when you wake up to a voice calling your name, the first thing you feel is not science. The first thing you feel is that someone is there. And when the voice belongs to someone who is gone from your life or gone from the world completely, that feeling stays with you long after the room goes quiet again. For months, I heard loud scratching inside the walls of my house, and it slowly made me feel like I was losing my mind. At first, I tried to brush it off the way people do when they hear strange sounds at home. Houses make noise. Walls shift. Pipes tick. Wood expands and contracts. Sometimes a branch scrapes against the outside of the house, or something small moves in the attic. Or the wind finds a gap somewhere and makes the whole place sound alive. There are plenty of normal reasons for a house to make noise, and I wanted it to be one of those. But this sound did not feel normal. It was scratching. Loud scratching. Not a little faint sound that could be ignored. It was the kind of scratching that made me stop what I was doing and listen. Sometimes it seemed to come from one wall, sometimes another. It was inside the house, but not in any room I could walk into. That made it worse. If something had been on the floor, under furniture, or outside a window, I could have looked at it, dealt with it, and moved on. But this was hidden inside the walls, close enough to hear, but out of reach. At first, I tried to stay practical. Maybe it was mice. Maybe squirrels had gotten in somewhere. Maybe the house had a pest problem. That was not a comforting answer, but it was better than the alternatives my mind started playing with at night. The problem was that I never saw anything. No mouse running across the floor. No droppings in obvious places. No clear evidence that would let me say, okay, this is what it is. The sound kept happening, but the source stayed hidden. After a while, the scratching started to affect the way I felt in the house. During the day, I could explain it better. Daylight makes everything easier. A scratching wall in the afternoon sounds annoying and gross, but not necessarily terrifying. You can tell yourself there must be an animal in there somewhere, and you make a mental note to deal with it. But at night, when the house is quiet and you are trying to sleep, every sound becomes bigger. The scratching would cut through the silence, and I would lie there listening, wondering what was moving inside the walls. It is strange how quickly your imagination fills in the blanks. When you cannot see what is making the noise, your mind gives it a shape. Sometimes I pictured something small with claws, crawling through the narrow spaces behind the drywall. Sometimes I pictured something larger, something that should not have been able to fit there, but somehow did. And sometimes, when it had gone on for months and I still had no answer, I started wondering if maybe it was not an animal at all. I know that sounds dramatic, but long-term unexplained noise can do that to a person. You start by thinking, there must be a normal explanation. Then you think, why can't I find the normal explanation? Then, after enough nights of hearing the same hidden scratching, you start wondering if the house is haunted, or if you are going crazy. Those were the two possibilities that kept circling in my head. Either there was something wrong with the house, or there was something wrong with me. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe stress was making me hear things. Maybe I was paying too much attention to every little sound, turning normal house noise into something sinister. Or maybe some part of my mind whispered, there really was something in the walls that was not supposed to be there. The sound went on for months. That was the worst part. If it had happened once or twice, I would have forgotten about it. If an animal had appeared quickly, I would have had an answer. But the longer it continued without a clear source, the more it got under my skin. It became part of the house's personality. I would sit in a room and wait for it. I would pause the TV to listen. I would stand near a wall and try to figure out where exactly it was coming from. Sometimes the sound would stop as soon as I got close, which only made it feel more like something was aware of me. Of course, that was probably just timing, but when you are already creeped out, timing feels personal. Eventually, I found out what it was. Bats. There were bats in the walls. I did not discover that calmly. It was not like someone came over, inspected the house, and gave me a neat explanation while everything stayed under control. No, I found out because one of them finally got out and flew into my bedroom at around 2 a.m. That was the moment the mystery became real in the worst possible way. I was in my room, probably trying to sleep or already half asleep, when suddenly there was a bat flying around in there with me. If you have never had a bat in your bedroom at 2 a.m, it is hard to explain how fast your body goes from tired to pure panic. 1 second, you are in your own space, where you are supposed to feel safe. The next second, there is something alive flying around your head in the dark. It scared the absolute shit out of me. A bat does not move like a bird in a way that feels predictable. It darts. It changes direction suddenly. It flutters through the air in quick, sharp movements. And in a dark room, that makes it feel like it is everywhere at once. You hear the wings. You see the shape cut across the room. You duck even when it is not close enough to hit you, because your body does not care about exact distance. Your body just knows something is flying inside your bedroom. All the months of scratching suddenly made sense. There had not been a ghost in the walls. There had not been some mysterious haunting. There had been bats living inside the structure of the house, moving around, scratching, shifting, and hiding where I could not see them. In a way, that should have been comforting. At least it was not supernatural. At least I was not going crazy. At least the noise had a real, physical cause, but the relief only lasted for about half a second, because then I had a new problem. There was a bat in my bedroom. And honestly, the bat was just as scary as anything paranormal. Maybe scarier. Because a ghost might spook you. It might make a noise, move something, or give you a story to tell later. But a bat is real. A bat can bite you. And if there is one thing people know about bats, it is that rabies is a serious concern. A ghost story can make you lose sleep. A bat bite can kill you if you do not take it seriously. That thought hit me after the fear started to settle. At the time, I was mostly trying to deal with the immediate panic of having it in the room, but later I realized how lucky I was that I did not get bitten, or at least that I did not notice any bite. Bats have tiny teeth, and sometimes people can be bitten without realizing it, especially if they are asleep when the bat gets into the room. Looking back, I probably should have gotten a rabies shot, just to be safe. That would have been the responsible thing to do. At the time, I did not. And I was lucky. Really lucky. It is strange, because before I knew what it was, my fear was more supernatural. The scratching in the walls felt like something hidden, something maybe not fully explainable. I wondered if the house was haunted. I wondered if I was hearing things. I wondered if something unseen was moving around behind the walls, but once I learned it was bats, the fear became more practical, and practical fear can be worse. A ghost might be impossible to prove, but bats require action. You have to figure out how they got in. You have to worry about whether there are more. You have to think about droppings, disease, bites, and how long they have been living there. You have to wonder if one was in the room before and you did not know. You have to think about all those nights when you heard scratching and imagine something paranormal, when in reality there were living animals moving through the walls close to where you slept. That is not exactly comforting. It also made me realize how easily a real problem can feel like a haunting when it stays hidden. If I had never seen the bat, I might still wonder what the scratching was. I might have told the story as some creepy, unexplained noise in the walls that lasted for months. People might have said it was a spirit, a warning, something attached to the house. And honestly, before the bat appeared, I might have believed them a little. Not fully, maybe, but enough to be unsettled. But the truth was alive, winged, and possibly dangerous. That is why the experience stuck with me. It reminded me that not every scary thing is supernatural, but that does not make it less scary. Sometimes the normal explanation is still horrible. Sometimes the thing in the wall is not a ghost, but it is still something you really do not want near you. I spent months hearing that scratching, wondering if I was losing my mind or living in a haunted house. Then one night at 2 a.m, a bat flew into my bedroom and gave me the answer in the most terrifying way possible. I was glad to know what it was. I was also completely horrified. And if anything like that ever happens again, I will not wait months trying to explain it away. Strange scratching in the walls might be pests. It might be bats. It might be something else entirely, but whatever it is, I would rather find out early than wake up to it flying around my room in the dark. Because a ghost may scare you, but a bat in your bedroom can be a real danger. And honestly, that makes it just as terrifying. At first I brushed it off because animals are just weird sometimes. That was the explanation I kept giving myself. If you spend enough time around animals, especially out near dirt roads, desert trails, or quiet open places, you start to accept that they react to things you do not always understand. They hear sounds you miss. They smell things you cannot smell. They freeze at empty patches of dark. They chase nothing. They stare into brush like something is staring back. Most of the time, there is probably a normal reason. A mouse, a lizard, a rabbit, a scent trail, a far-off animal, something small and ordinary that humans are too dull to notice. So when strange little things started happening, I tried not to make a big deal out of them. There was one night hike I went on, and on the way there, a rabbit ran in front of me through a certain section of dirt road. That was not strange by itself. Rabbits live out there. They dart across roads. They panic and move fast for no reason. It happens. But then, on the way back from that same hike, through that same section of dirt road, another rabbit, or maybe the same one, ran in front of me again in almost the same way. It was odd enough to notice, but still not enough to scare me. I could laugh it off. Animals repeat patterns. Maybe it had a burrow nearby. Maybe it was coincidence. That was how I treated most things at first. Coincidence. Animal behavior. The desert being the desert. But then came the smell. That was the worst part. It was the smell of death, and I could not find where it was coming from. Anyone who has smelled death outside knows there is no mistaking it. It is not like normal garbage or something mildly rotten. It has a deep, heavy, wrong smell that seems to sit in the air and get into the back of your throat. It makes your body react before your mind finishes identifying it. It is a smell that says something is dead nearby, and usually, if you follow it long enough, you will find the source. A dead animal in the brush, a bird under a bush, a rabbit, a rat, a coyote, something hit by a car and dragged away. There is normally an answer. This smell was not far from home. That made it worse, because it was close enough that I could not ignore it. If it had been out on some distant trail, I could have walked away and let nature handle it. But this was near enough to be part of daily life, near enough that every time I passed through that area, there it was again. Strong, ugly, impossible to miss. I kept thinking I would eventually find whatever had died. I would see the flies, the fur, the bones, the disturbed dirt, something, but I could not locate it. The smell lasted for weeks. That was when it started to feel wrong. A dead animal smell can linger, sure, especially if something large dies in a hidden place. But usually the smell changes. It gets stronger, then fades. Or scavengers find the body and scatter it. Or the wind shifts and gives you a better sense of direction. This smell just stayed around, heavy and disgusting. Always somewhere nearby, but never exactly findable. It was like the source was always just out of reach. My dog noticed it too. And that mattered because my dog was an expert at finding nasty things. He was the kind of dog that could locate something dead, before I even knew there was anything around. If there was a corpse anywhere nearby, even something as small as a lizard, he would find it. He loved disgusting things the way dogs sometimes do. If something smelled rotten, dead, or foul enough to make a human gag, he wanted to roll in it. He never passed up the chance. It was annoying, but it also meant I trusted his nose. If the smell was there, he should have been able to find the source. But even he could not seem to settle it. The smell was driving him nuts. That was what really started to bother me. He would search, sniff, circle, and act like he knew something was there, but he could not get to it. Or he could not decide where it was. Or maybe he knew and did not want to go all the way in. I do not know. But he was not acting like he normally did around dead things. Usually, if there was a nasty corpse nearby, he went straight for it with terrible enthusiasm. This time, he seemed agitated. Interested, yes, but not happy. Not excited in the normal disgusting dog way. More unsettled. For weeks, that smell stayed. I kept trying to reason with myself. Maybe it was under something. Maybe an animal had crawled into a hidden space to die. Maybe the wind was carrying the smell from farther away than I thought. Maybe there was a drainage area, a hollow, a pile of brush, or some patch of earth I had not checked closely enough. Maybe I was making it stranger than it was because I could not locate it. But every explanation left me with the same problem. My dog should have found it. Then one day, the smell disappeared. Just like that. After weeks of being there, it was gone. The air felt different immediately. That heavy dead smell was no longer hanging around the area. I remember noticing it, because I had become so used to bracing myself for it. You know how you prepare your face and breathing before passing something foul? I had been doing that for weeks. Then suddenly, there was nothing to prepare for. The smell had lifted. I should have been relieved. Instead, my dog did something that made the whole thing worse. He jogged ahead of me, maybe 20 yards or so, moving with purpose. It was not unusual for him to go ahead, but something about his energy caught my attention. He seemed to know where he was going. Then he rushed back toward me, carrying something in his mouth. At first, I did not understand what it was. Then I saw the shape. It looked like a shoulder blade bone, and not from some tiny animal. It was large enough that, for one awful second, I thought it could match my own. That thought hit me hard. I am not saying I knew it was human. I do not know what it was from. Animals have shoulder blades too, and bones can look strange when they are out of context, especially when they are dirty, broken, or half covered in tissue. But the size and shape made my mind go there instantly. It was not some little bird bone or small lizard remains. It looked big, too big, familiar in a way I did not like. It was slimy and gooey. That was another thing that bothered me. If it had been the source of the death smell for weeks, I expected it to stink horribly, especially if it still had slime or tissue on it. But when my dog brought it back, it smelled like nothing to me. Nothing. After all those weeks of that unbearable dead smell, he came running back with this wet, disgusting bone, and I could not smell anything from it. That did not make sense. My dog had found it the day the death smell vanished. He brought me a large, slimy, gooey shoulder blade looking bone, and somehow it had no smell. I reacted without thinking too much. I grabbed it, or got it away from him somehow, and chucked it as far as I could in the direction he had retrieved it from. I did not want him chewing on it. I did not want to inspect it closely. I did not want to hold it any longer than I had to. Everything in me wanted that thing away from us. The second I threw it, my dog reacted strangely. He backed up and barked at me. Not at the bone, at me. He barked like I had done something wrong, like I had crossed a line, like he wanted me to understand that we needed to leave. This was not his usual behavior around gross things. Normally, if I took something disgusting from him and threw it, he would try to chase it, find it again, or at least keep sniffing around. But this time, he backed away and barked until I listened. He wanted to leave, and I finally did. That was the moment I stopped trying so hard to explain everything away. Because dogs are weird, yes. Animals do strange things, yes. The desert and back roads and wild areas are full of bones, smells, and scavenged remains. But my dog's behavior did not match what I knew about him. He loved nasty things. He loved dead things. He never passed up a corpse, even if it was only a small lizard. Yet with this, he seemed disturbed. The smell had bothered him for weeks, then vanished the same day he brought me that bone. And once I threw it back toward where it came from, he barked at me until I left with him. I have thought about normal explanations. Maybe it was from a deer, a dog, a coyote, or some other animal. Maybe it only looked like it could match a human shoulder blade because I was already uneasy. Maybe the smell had come from a different carcass nearby, and my dog found an unrelated bone after the smell faded. Maybe decomposition, moisture, and weather made the bones slimy without leaving much odor. Maybe the wind had changed that day, so I could no longer smell whatever was still out there. Those are all possible. But none of them explain the feeling I had. And none of them explain my dog's reaction in a way that satisfies me. The entire situation felt like something was hidden nearby for weeks, rotting close to home, but refusing to be found. It felt like the smell was there to warn us, or lure us, or mark the area. Then, when it disappeared, my dog came back with a piece of something that looked far too large and far too familiar. And when I threw it away, instead of chasing it, he backed up and barked until I went with him. That is not how he usually acted. That is what stays with me. If he had rolled in it, I would have been disgusted, but not scared. If he had run back and tried to keep it like a prize, that would have been normal dog behavior. If he had taken me to a dead animal, at least the mystery of the smell would have been solved. But he did not do any of that. He brought back the bone, let me see it, and then seemed desperate for us to leave after I threw it. Sometimes I wonder what was back there. I wonder if I should have gone to look. Then I remember how he acted, and I am glad I did not. There are things you can find in rough land that you cannot unfind. Animal remains, sure, but sometimes other things too. Things someone left there. Things that should have been reported. Things that might have had a story attached to them. And when something smells like death for weeks, but cannot be located, then suddenly stops smelling the same day a large, slimy bone appears, it is hard not to let your mind go to dark places. I still do not know what the bone belonged to. Maybe it was nothing more than an animal's shoulder blade, dragged around by scavengers and weathered until it looked worse than it was. Maybe my dog's reaction had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with frustration because I threw away something he wanted. Maybe he barked at me because he wanted to go back and get it. Maybe I read too much into it because the whole situation had already unsettled me. But I know my dog. He did not bark like he wanted a treat back. He barked like he wanted out. That is the difference. And I listened to him. After that, I stopped brushing weird things off so easily. I still believe animals can act strange for ordinary reasons. I still know a rabbit running across a dirt road is just a rabbit most of the time. I know death smells happen in wild places because animals die, scavengers drag remains around, and nature is not clean or polite. But there is a point where the little explanations start to feel thin. Weeks of a death smell I could not find. A dog that normally loved corpses acting unsettled. The smell vanishing. A large, slimy shoulder blade looking bone that smelled like nothing. My dog backing up and barking at me until I left. Maybe it was all just one ugly natural chain of events. Maybe it was a dead animal, nothing more. But I still think about the way that bone looked when he came rushing back with it. I still think about how close it had been to home. I still think about the absence of smell after weeks of death in the air. And I still think about my dog, who never backed down from anything rotten. Suddenly deciding that whatever was out there was something we needed to walk away from. So that is what we did. I threw the bone back toward where it came from, and when my dog barked at me to leave, I left. And honestly, I am still glad I did. I am not religious. I am not superstitious. I am not spiritual in any strong way. I have never been the kind of person who looks for signs in every little thing, or who hears a strange noise and immediately thinks it must be a ghost, a demon, or some ancient warning. I have always leaned more toward the practical side of things. If something weird happens, my first instinct is to look for the normal explanation. Wind, animals, bad wiring, tired eyes, heat, dehydration, stress, distance, shadows, echoes, anything. There is usually some reason for things, even if you do not understand it right away. But after living out in the desert, and I mean really out in the desert, not just in a town near it, I absolutely do not mess around with anything weird happening out there. The desert changes the way you think about fear. Before I lived there, I thought I understood darkness and quiet. I had been in dark places before. I had walked around at night. I had heard strange sounds in old houses and empty streets. But desert darkness is different. It is wide open, and somehow that makes it feel more closed in. There are no city lights to soften the edges of things. No constant traffic hum to remind you people are nearby. No neighbors close enough to make you feel like help is just across the street. Out there, when the sun goes down, the world becomes huge and empty, and you become very aware of how small you are. During the day, the desert can be harsh but understandable. You can see the land. You can see the rocks, the scrub brush, the dry washes, the distant hills, the tracks in the dirt, the places where animals have moved through. The heat can be brutal, and the silence can still feel strange, but daylight gives you information. You know what is around you. You can judge distance. You can see what is moving and what is not. At night, all of that disappears. The desert at night is not just dark. It is full of space you cannot read. A sound can come from far away and seem close, or happen right beside you and seem far off. Something can move in the brush, and you will not know if it is a rabbit, a coyote, a person, or something you do not want to name. A light on the horizon can look like it is a mile away or 10 miles away. A figure standing still can become a cactus until it moves, and a cactus can look like a figure until you force yourself to stop staring. After enough time out there, you start to respect that. And respect is the right word. Not belief. Not panic. Respect. I still do not consider myself religious. I still do not call myself spiritual. I still do not think every strange thing is supernatural. But I learned that the desert is not a place where you go chasing answers just because your pride tells you not to be scared. If something feels wrong out there, I do not stand around trying to prove I am brave. I leave. If I hear something that does not sound right, I do not walk toward it in the dark. If a light appears where no light should be, I do not signal it for fun. If something moves in a way that does not match an animal or a person, I do not try to get closer so I can figure it out. That is how people get themselves into trouble. Maybe the danger is human. Maybe it is an animal. Maybe it is the land itself. Maybe it is your own body getting tired, thirsty, or disoriented. Maybe it is something completely normal that only feels strange because the desert makes everything feel ancient and watchful. But whatever the cause is, the rule is the same. Do not mess around with it. The desert does not care if you are skeptical. That is one of the things I learned. You can be the most rational person in the world, but if you are alone at night and something is happening that does not fit, logic does not keep you safe by itself. Logic can help you afterward, when you are back inside with a locked door and a glass of water, trying to explain the sound, the light, the shape, or the feeling. But in the moment, when you are standing under a sky full of stars with miles of empty land around you, instinct matters too. People like to make fun of instinct because it sounds vague. They say things like, "You just scared yourself," or "You were probably imagining it." Sometimes that is true. Fear can turn nothing into something. But instinct is not always imagination. Sometimes it is your brain noticing details too small or too fast for you to consciously understand. A silence that should not be there. A sound that repeats too perfectly. A shadow that moves against the wind. An animal suddenly going still. A feeling that the space around you has changed. Out in the desert, you learn to listen to that feeling. There were times when nothing specific happened, and I still knew it was time to go inside. The air would shift. The night would feel different. The quiet would stop being peaceful and start feeling like something was holding its breath. Maybe there was a coyote nearby. Maybe a person was out there somewhere. Maybe a storm was building miles away. Maybe my mind was just tired. I do not know. But I learned not to argue with that feeling for too long, because the desert is full of things that can hurt you, even when they are completely ordinary. A rattlesnake does not need to be supernatural. A mountain lion does not need to be a ghost. A stranger wandering around in the dark does not need to be some kind of legend. A washed-out road, a wrong turn, a dead phone, a low water bottle, or a vehicle that will not start can become life-threatening very quickly when you are far enough out. People forget that. They think the scary part of the desert is only the strange stories, the skinwalker talk, the ghost lights, the figures at the edge of the headlights. But the real danger is that the desert is already dangerous before anything weird happens. So when something weird does happen, I do not add curiosity to the risk. I think that is the difference between someone who visits the desert for a thrill and someone who has lived out there. Visitors want a story. They want to see the strange light, hear the odd sound, follow the footprints, call out into the darkness, walk toward the shape near the wash. They want to come back with proof that something happened. They want to test the legend. People who live out there know better. You do not call out to something just because it called first. You do not follow a light because it seems to be waiting. You do not step outside at 2 in the morning because the dogs are staring at the same empty patch of dark. You do not go wandering after a noise that sounds almost human, but not quite. You do not assume that because you do not believe in monsters, nothing in the dark can be dangerous. That last part is important. Not believing in something does not make you safe from it, especially when you do not even know what it is. I do not have to believe in demons to know I should avoid a stranger standing motionless near my property at night. I do not have to believe in spirits to know I should not chase a voice through a dry wash. I do not have to believe in curses to know that if every animal around me suddenly reacts to the same empty direction, I should pay attention. I do not have to believe in anything supernatural to understand that weirdness in the desert deserves caution. And if it is supernatural, then I definitely do not want to be the person who gets close enough to find out. That is the part people misunderstand when skeptics talk about fear. Being skeptical does not mean being stupid. It does not mean you walk toward danger because you think you are too smart to be scared. In my opinion, real skepticism includes knowing when you do not have enough information. If something is happening and you cannot identify the cause, especially in a remote place, the smart answer is not always to investigate. Sometimes the smart answer is to leave and think about it later. The desert taught me that. It taught me that not every mystery needs to be solved in person. It taught me that there is no shame in getting out of there. It taught me that the old human instinct to survive is older and more useful than the modern desire to prove you are not afraid. I have heard people laugh about desert stories. They say it was probably just an animal, probably just wind, probably just a drunk person, probably just headlights, probably just imagination. Maybe they are right most of the time. But those same people usually say it from a safe room, under electric lights, with other people nearby. It is easy to be brave when the desert is not wrapped around you. Out there, it feels different. When you are really out in it, and the nearest help is too far away to matter, and the dark is pressing against every window, and something happens that does not fit any normal pattern, you stop caring about sounding rational to other people. You care about getting through the night. That is where I am now. I still do not call myself religious. I still do not sit around burning sage or reading signs into every sound. I still believe most things probably have explanations. But I also believe there are places where you should be humble, and the desert is one of them. It is too old, too wide, too empty, and too unforgiving to treat like a playground for curiosity. So if I am out in the desert and something weird starts happening, I am done. No debate. No let's check it out. No maybe it's nothing. No proving a point. I leave. Because maybe it is just wind. Maybe it is just an animal. Maybe it is just a person. Maybe it is just my mind reacting to darkness, distance, and silence. But after living out there, I learned one thing for sure. Whatever the explanation is, the desert can keep it. A friend of mine once told me his stranger in the desert story, but it was not wholesome or comforting in any way. It was not one of those stories where someone appears out of nowhere, helps you, gives you advice, and then disappears like some mysterious guardian angel. His story was creepy. The kind of creepy that does not rely on anything loud or violent happening. Nobody was attacked. Nobody saw a monster. Nobody got chased through the desert. But the way he told it made it feel wrong from the very beginning. He lived in Phoenix at the time, and he said that when he was younger, he and some friends used to drive out into the desert at night sometimes. It was something they did just to get away from everything for a while. Phoenix has the city lights, traffic, noise, and all the usual busy life, but if you drive far enough out, the desert opens around you. At night, it can feel like the whole world has gone quiet. The darkness there is different. It does not feel like darkness in a house or a neighborhood. It feels huge, empty, deep. They would go out there to hang out, drink a few beers, talk, laugh, and sometimes build a small bonfire. It was the kind of thing young guys do when they want space and privacy. Out in the desert, there are no neighbors telling you to quiet down. No parents asking what time you are coming home. No one walking by and bothering you. Just dirt, rocks, scrub brush, open sky, and darkness stretching in every direction. Most nights were probably normal. They would sit around the fire, drink, joke, and enjoy the feeling of being away from everything. I imagine the fire made the area around them feel safe, like a small circle of light in the middle of all that black desert. But outside that firelight, there would have been nothing but shadow. The kind of shadow where anything could be standing just far enough away that you would never know. One night, they were out there like usual. They had driven into the desert, parked, and started hanging out. There was a bonfire going, and everyone was in that loud, relaxed mood people get into when they are with friends and have had a few drinks. He described it as a boisterous vibe, everyone talking over each other, laughing, probably being louder than they needed to be because there was no one around to care. Then a woman walked out of the darkness. That was how he said it. She just walked out of the desert darkness and came toward them. There was no car sound before she appeared. No headlights in the distance. No flashlight. No group of people with her. No campsite nearby that they knew of. She was just suddenly there, coming out of the dark as if the desert had produced her. At night, in a place like that, a person appearing on foot is already strange. The desert is not a casual place to wander around alone in the dark. It is uneven, dry, full of rocks, cactus, holes, animals, and all kinds of things that can hurt you if you cannot see where you are stepping. Most people do not just stroll out of it without a light, but she did. She walked right into their little circle, and she joined them. Not in a normal way, like someone saying, "Hey, are you guys from around here? Or can I use your phone? Or my car broke down." She did not seem to have any obvious reason for being there. She just meandered among them, moving here and there, as if she belonged, or as if she had decided she was allowed to be part of their group for a little while. My friend said that, for some reason, he would not look at her directly. That detail bothered me the most when he told the story. He said nothing about her appearance was clear enough for him to describe in a normal way, because he avoided looking straight at her. It was not because someone told him not to. It was not because he was trying to be polite. It was a gut feeling. Something inside him told him not to make direct eye contact, not to study her face, not to let himself really see her. He could sense her there. He could see her movement in the edge of his vision. He knew she was walking among them, but he would not look directly at her. He said it felt instinctive. That is not a small thing. People look at strangers automatically, especially when they appear somewhere they should not. If a random woman walks out of the desert at night and into a group of guys around a fire, everyone's first reaction should be to look at her. Who is she? Is she hurt? Is she drunk? Is she lost? Is someone with her? Does she need help? Is she dangerous? Looking at her would be the most natural thing in the world. But he could not bring himself to do it. Something in him said, "Do not look." The whole mood of the group changed too. Before she arrived, they had been loud, joking, drinking, and enjoying themselves. But when she came into the circle, that energy died down, not all at once in some dramatic silence, but enough that everyone seemed to quiet themselves without agreeing to it. The laughter dropped. The talking became smaller. The easy confidence they had out there faded. It was as if her presence drained the heat out of the group even though the fire was still burning. She moved among them for a while. No one knew what to do. That is the part I find so strange. If she had seemed like a normal woman who was lost, they might have asked if she needed help. If she had seemed threatening, maybe someone would have told her to leave. If she had been obviously drunk or high, they might have reacted in some way. But from the way he described it, Everyone seemed almost frozen into politeness and discomfort. Nobody wanted to cause a scene. Nobody wanted to say the wrong thing. Nobody wanted to look too hard. She just wandered around them. Then, after a while, she walked back into the darkness. Just like that. No explanation. No goodbye. No car. No light. She simply turned and disappeared back into the desert, the same way she had come. Swallowed by the black beyond the fire. For a few seconds, they just sat there. Then suddenly, everyone knew they had to leave. My friend described it like a shared feeling that hit them all at once. Not a discussion, not one guy saying, "This is weird, let's go." It was more like the whole group felt the same warning at the same time. The mood had been strange while she was there, but once she left, the fear came in hard. It was as if the moment she disappeared, whatever spell or pressure had kept them sitting there broke, and all of them understood they needed to get out of that place immediately. They put out the fire as fast as they could. Then they jumped in the vehicle and peeled out of there. No one wanted to hang around. No one wanted to check where she had gone. No one wanted to call out into the desert after her. No one wanted to laugh it off and say she was just some weird woman wandering around. The whole group went from sitting around a bonfire to getting the hell out of there. Because something about that encounter had crossed a line none of them wanted to talk about. Later, that was one of the strangest parts. No one wanted to talk about it. You would think a story like that would become the main thing everyone discussed afterward. A random woman walking out of the desert darkness at night and joining your group? That should have been all they talked about for days. They should have been asking each other who she was, where she came from, what she looked like, why she was there, and whether anyone got a good look at her face. But according to my friend, they mostly avoided the subject. It was like everyone wanted to push it away. And then there was the part where a couple of the guys insisted they did not see any woman at all. That makes the whole story even worse. My friend knew he saw her, or at least knew she had been there. He knew the mood had changed when she arrived. He knew she walked among them. He knew he avoided looking at her directly because some deep instinct warned him not to. But later, some of the guys said there had been no woman. They either genuinely did not see her, or they were so disturbed by it that they refused to admit it. Both possibilities are unsettling. If they did see her and denied it, then the encounter scared them badly enough that they would rather lie than talk about it. But if they truly did not see her, then what was she? How could some people experience a figure moving among the group while others saw nothing? How could the whole mood shift if not everyone perceived the same thing? And why would my friend feel such a strong warning not to look directly at her? The part he kept coming back to was that feeling. Do not look at her. He did not know where it came from. He did not know why it mattered, but he trusted it. Even telling the story later, he still seemed disturbed by that detail. It was like some deeper survival instinct had spoken inside him, the same kind that tells animals to freeze or run before danger fully appears. Maybe there was something wrong with her face. Maybe looking at her would have changed something. Maybe he sensed that if he made eye contact, she would notice him in a different way. That is probably irrational, but fear does not always care about being rational. When my friend told his dad about it later, his dad did not laugh. He did not give a practical explanation. He did not say it was some homeless woman, a drunk person, a lost hiker, or a desert hallucination. He just shook his head and said it was not a woman. He said it was the devil disguised as one. That response may sound extreme, but hearing it from an older person with that kind of certainty can make a story feel heavier. Some parents would dismiss their kids' creepy desert story just to calm them down. His dad did the opposite. He gave the encounter a darker meaning. He seemed to believe there are things out there that can appear in familiar forms, things that walk close to people in lonely places and test whether they will recognize the danger. I do not know if I believe it was literally the devil. That is a big claim, and there is no way to prove something like that. Maybe she was a real woman. Maybe she was homeless, lost, mentally ill, or under the influence of something. Maybe she lived somewhere nearby and knew those desert paths well enough to walk without light. Maybe the guys had been drinking enough that their memory of the event became strange. Maybe some of them denied seeing her because they were embarrassed or did not want to seem scared. Those explanations exist. But there are details that do not sit right. A woman alone in the desert at night, with no light. The way she walked out of complete darkness and joined them without explanation. The way the entire group's mood dropped. My friend's overwhelming instinct not to look at her directly. Her wandering among them like she was studying the group. The way she left without saying anything and disappeared back into the dark. The sudden shared certainty that they had to go right then. The refusal to talk about it afterward. The guys who said they never saw her at all of that makes the story feel like more than a strange person in the desert. And maybe that is why it stuck with me when he told it. The desert already feels like a place where the normal rules can thin out. It is beautiful, but it is harsh. At night, it becomes huge and empty in a way that can make people feel small. The darkness between the firelight and the horizon feels alive. You can sit there laughing with your friends, thinking you are in control of the moment, and then something can step out of the black and remind you that the desert was there long before you arrived, and will still be there after you leave. Maybe she was just a woman. Maybe she was something pretending to be one. My friend never found out. He only knew what he felt. And what he felt was warning, the kind of warning that makes you avoid eye contact without knowing why. The kind that makes a whole group of young men suddenly stop joking. The kind that sends everyone scrambling to put out a fire and peel away into the night without needing to explain it. I cannot say I blame them. If I were sitting around a bonfire in the Phoenix desert and a woman walked out of the darkness with no light, no car, no explanation, and something deep in me told me not to look at her directly, I would not stay either. Some strangers in the desert are not there to be helped. And some shapes that come out of the dark are better left unseen. When I was in high school, I lived on the outskirts of a small suburb. It was not exactly the middle of nowhere, but it was far enough out that parts of it still felt quiet and underdeveloped, especially at night. Our neighborhood backed up against some woods, and there was a little winding road that ran along a creek. During the day, it was a nice enough area, trees, water, the kind of place people might walk near if the weather was good. But at night, it changed completely. There were no streetlights on that road. That made it feel much darker than the rest of the neighborhood. Once you left the brighter streets behind and got onto that stretch, it felt like you had driven out of the suburb and into something older and more isolated. The trees leaned in close on both sides, and the road curved enough that you could never see too far ahead. The creek was somewhere nearby, running through the dark, and the woods swallowed up most of the sound. It was the kind of place where your headlights became the only thing keeping the world visible. One night, around 1 a.m, I was driving home from a friend's house. I was not drunk. I was not speeding. I was not doing anything reckless in the way people might assume when they hear about a teenager driving late at night. I was actually being careful because I knew deer could come out around there. That road had enough trees and enough darkness that hitting an animal was a real possibility, so even though I was the only car out there, I was paying attention. The whole area felt empty. No cars behind me, no cars coming toward me, no houses close enough to throw light across the road, just my headlights, the road, the trees, and the black space beyond them. I had driven that way before, so I was not terrified or anything. It was familiar enough, but still creepy, and that specific way back roads are creepy when you are alone and young, and everything outside the windshield looks like a wall of darkness. Then I did something stupid. I decided to switch my headlights off for just a second. I do not know why. I was a dumb teenager, and I think I was curious to see how dark it really was without them. Maybe I wanted to scare myself a little. Maybe I thought it would be interesting. Maybe I wanted to see if my eyes could adjust to the darkness for a moment. It was one of those pointless decisions that only make sense when you are young and alone and bored on a dark road. I did not slow down completely. I did not stop the car. I only took my foot off the gas and tapped the headlights off. The world disappeared. It was pitch black. I remember that darkness so clearly. It was not like driving in a city where your headlights go off and you can still see shapes from street lamps, porches, signs, or other cars. There was nothing like that out there. Maybe there was a tiny fragment of moonlight breaking through the trees in places, but barely enough to matter. The road, the woods, the creek, everything vanished. For that brief second, it felt like I was moving through empty black space. And then I turned the headlights back on. There was a man standing directly in front of me. He was maybe 20 feet away, right where the road curved. He was standing in the lane, dressed in black, looking straight at me. Not walking across the road, not stepping out of the way, not turned to the side like someone who had just been caught by surprise. He was facing me, staring directly into my headlights. Ice went through my veins. I almost jumped out of my skin. 1 second the road had been empty, or at least I thought it was empty. The next second, a man appeared in front of my car like he had been waiting there in the dark. Because the headlights had been off for that tiny moment, I had no warning. No shape gradually becoming clearer. No distant figure ahead. Just blackness, then headlights, then him. My first thought was that I could have hit him. That hit me instantly. I had turned my lights off while the car was still moving. I had not been going fast, but I was still moving. If he had been standing even a little closer, or if I had kept the lights off for another second, I might have hit him before I even knew he was there. The thought made my stomach drop. It was one of those moments where a stupid little decision suddenly shows you how badly it could have gone. But right after that first shock came a second, more disturbing thought. Why was he there? It was 1 a.m. The road was dark, wooded, and had no street lights. There were no sidewalks there, no reason for someone to be standing in the middle of the road at that hour. He was not dressed in anything reflective. He was dressed in black, almost like he wanted to blend into the night. If my headlights had been on the whole time, I might have seen him sooner, but with them off for that second. He had been completely invisible. He was not waving for help. He was not stumbling like he was hurt. He was not trying to flag me down. He was just standing there. Staring, that is what made it so wrong. If I had come across someone walking normally along the edge of the road, it would have been weird but explainable. Maybe someone lived nearby. Maybe someone was taking a late walk. Maybe their car broke down. But standing directly in the road at a curve, dressed in black, in the middle of the night, staring at an approaching car was different. It felt intentional. I did not stop. I just kept driving. I know some people might say I should have stopped to see if he needed help, but in that moment, every instinct I had told me not to. I was alone. I was a teenager. It was 1 a.m. on a dark road near the woods. A man in black had just appeared in front of my car after I turned my headlights back on. Maybe he was a real person in trouble, but maybe he was not. And even if he was real, I had no idea what he wanted. There are moments where politeness can get you killed. That was how it felt. So I kept going, probably with my hands tight on the wheel and my heart hammering in my chest. I do not remember if I swerved around him or if he was far enough to the side by the time I passed, but I remember not stopping. I did not roll down the window. I did not ask if he was okay. I did not wait to see if he turned around. I just drove. The whole way home, my mind kept replaying it. Had I imagined him? That question came almost immediately, because the alternative was so unsettling. The headlights were off for only a second. Maybe my eyes were adjusting weirdly when I turned them back on. Maybe a tree, shadow, or road sign looked like a man for a split second. Maybe the curve in the branches made a shape that my scared brain interpreted as someone standing there. That would be the easiest explanation. But I saw him. I saw the shape of a person, a man, standing upright, dressed in black, facing me, staring at me. It was not a vague blob or a branch. It was a person. Then I thought about whether he had been there the entire time. That was almost worse. If he was a real person, then he had been standing there in complete darkness before my headlights came back on. He would have seen my car coming. He would have seen the headlights go off. He would have stayed there anyway. He did not move out of the road when he heard the engine. He did not step aside when he saw the car. He waited in the dark until my lights came back on, and then he was right there in front of me. What kind of person does that? Maybe he was trying to scare drivers. Maybe he was drunk or high. Maybe he was mentally unwell. Maybe he wanted someone to stop. Maybe there were other people in the woods waiting to rob whoever pulled over. Maybe he needed help, but did not know how to ask. Maybe he was just walking and froze when my lights came on. There are many human explanations, and some of them are scarier than a ghost. But none of them made me want to go back and check. I did not stop until I got home. When I finally pulled in, I was still shaken. The safe, familiar look of my own house felt completely different after that road. I remember feeling like I had escaped something, even though nothing actually chased me. It was the suddenness of it. The darkness. The way he appeared in the headlights like a figure being revealed on a stage. The knowledge that if I had kept my lights off just 1 second longer, I might not have had time to react. I never got an answer. I never heard about anyone being hit on that road that night. I never heard about a man wandering around in black clothes. No one came forward with some funny story about scaring teenagers near the creek. There was no explanation waiting for me later. It became one of those memories that just sits there, unresolved. Over time, I have thought about it from every angle. Maybe it was just a man out walking late, and the timing made it seem creepier than it was. Maybe he had been on the side of the road and looked like he was in the middle because of the curve. Maybe he was crossing and froze when my headlights snapped back on. Maybe my fear exaggerated how close he was. Maybe he was not staring at me but simply looking toward the sudden light. Those are all possible. But I still remember the feeling. I remember the road going completely black when I turned the lights off. I remember the headlights coming back on. I remember him standing there, 20 feet ahead, dressed in black. I remember his face turned toward me. I remember that icy shock through my body. And I remember thinking, after the first fear passed, that something about him being there was not right. The road itself made the whole thing worse. A winding back road along the woods and a creek with no streetlights is not a normal place for someone to stand in the middle of the lane at 1 in the morning. There were no stores nearby, no busy sidewalks, no steady traffic. It was not the kind of place where you expect to see anyone, and especially not someone wearing black and standing still where cars might come around a curve. If he was human, he was putting himself in serious danger. If he was not human, then I do not know what I saw. I am not saying it was a ghost. I am not even saying it was supernatural. A strange man on a dark road is already enough to be terrifying, but the way he appeared, the way he stood there, and the timing of my headlights coming back on made it feel like I had revealed something that had been hidden in the darkness. Like he was there the whole time, waiting. And I only saw him because I made the stupid mistake of turning my lights off and then back on again. I never did that again. Not once. That little experiment answered my question better than I wanted. I found out exactly how dark that road was without headlights. Dark enough that a man dressed in black could stand 20 feet in front of your car and be completely invisible until your lights came back on. And that was enough for me. I kept driving that night because stopping felt wrong. Maybe I left behind a confused man on a dark road. Maybe I avoided someone dangerous. Maybe I saw something that was never really there. I will never know. But I do know this. For 1 second, I turned off my headlights on a winding road in the woods, just to see how dark it was. When I turned them back on, a man was standing in front of me, staring straight at me, and I have never forgotten the cold fear of seeing him there. I read a story once from someone on Reddit that has stayed with me because of how simple it was. It was not full of gore, screaming, monsters, or anything dramatic like that. It was just a man camping at night, a light in the distance, and the slow realization that whatever was holding that light was not moving like a person should move. Sometimes those are the stories that bother me the most, not the ones where something jumps out, but the ones where one small detail is wrong, and that detail keeps getting worse the longer you think about it. He had gone camping alone, or at least he was by himself at the time this happened. It was nighttime, and he was out somewhere remote enough that there were no other people nearby. At least, none that he knew of, the kind of place where the darkness feels bigger than it does in a town or city. When you are camping, the world shrinks down to your fire, your tent, your truck, and whatever small circle of light you have around you. Everything beyond that becomes unknown. Trees, uneven ground, brush, rocks, dips in the land, and all the empty space you cannot see. At first, nothing seemed wrong. He was just out there in the dark, probably doing the usual camping things, settling in, listening to the night sounds, maybe enjoying the silence. But at some point, he noticed a light in the distance. It was far enough away that he could not make out what was behind it. He could not see a person. He could not see a vehicle. He could not tell if it was mounted on something or being carried by someone. All he could see was the light itself, glowing out there in the dark. That alone was not necessarily terrifying. People camp. People hike at night. Someone could have had a flashlight, a lantern, a headlamp, or some kind of equipment. A light in the distance does not automatically mean danger, but when you are alone at night in a rough outdoor area, any unexpected light gets your attention. It means there may be someone else out there, and you do not know who they are, what they want, or whether they even know you are there. He had a torch with him, so he flashed it toward the light. Maybe he was trying to signal. Maybe he was curious. Maybe he wanted to see if the person would respond. It could have been casual at first, almost like a little game. He flashed his light a certain number of times. Then the distant light flashed back. The same number of flashes. That would have been strange, but not immediately horrifying. If it was another camper, maybe they were being friendly. Maybe they thought it was funny. Maybe they were playing along. So he did it again, and the light answered again, matching him. It became a kind of call and response in the dark. His torch flashed. The other light flashed back the same number. For a few moments it might have seemed almost playful. But that kind of playfulness can turn cold very quickly when you remember you cannot see who is on the other end. The light was still just a light. No voice called out. No figure stepped into view. No one shouted, "Hey, we're over here." It was only that blinking response from the darkness, copying him. The more it matched him, the more aware he became that something out there was paying attention to him. Not just existing in the distance, not just moving randomly, but watching and responding. Then the light started coming toward him. That was when the mood changed. At first, maybe he thought it was a person walking over. Maybe another camper had seen his signal and decided to come say hello. But as the light moved closer, he noticed something that made the whole situation feel wrong. The ground between him and the light was not smooth. It was rough, uneven, and difficult. It was the kind of terrain where anyone walking with a flashlight would naturally move up and down, side to side, changing pace as they stepped over rocks, roots, brush, dips, and rises in the ground. A person's light does not stay perfectly steady when they walk over land like that. If someone is carrying a flashlight, the beam bobs with their steps. If it is a headlamp, it sways with the person's body. If it is mounted to a vehicle, you would hear the vehicle, and it would still bump and shift over rough ground. Even a careful walker cannot move perfectly smoothly across uneven terrain in the dark. There should have been some sign of a body behind the light. A little bounce, a little hesitation, a change in angle, a stumble, a pause, something. But there was none. The light moved straight toward him, perfectly smoothly. No sway, no bob, no deviation, no slowing when the ground should have made it slow, no little side movements to avoid obstacles, no rise and fall like feet stepping over uneven land. It just came forward in a smooth, direct line, like it was gliding. That was the detail that unnerved him. He still could not see what was holding it. The light itself was visible, but whatever was behind it remained hidden. It was as if the darkness swallowed everything except that one bright point. No arms, no legs, no body outline, no person behind the beam, just the light getting closer. He watched it for a few minutes. I imagine those minutes felt much longer. When something strange is moving toward you in the dark, time changes. You start measuring distance with your fear. How far is it now? How fast is it coming? How long before it reaches the edge of the campsite? What will you do when it gets close enough to see? What if there is nothing to see? What if the light arrives but no person is holding it? The copying flashes had already made it feel aware. The smooth movement made it feel impossible. Together, those two details turned an ordinary distant light into something he no longer wanted to understand. He could have waited. He could have told himself it was just another camper. He could have called out. He could have shined his torch directly at it and tried to see who was there. He could have convinced himself that leaving would be silly. People do that sometimes because they do not want to feel ridiculous. They stay too long because they are embarrassed by their own fear. He did not stay. He noped out. He started throwing his stuff into the back of his truck as fast as he could. At that point, packing properly did not matter. Folding things, organizing gear, making sure everything was neat, none of that mattered. When something unidentified is coming toward you through rough ground without moving like a human, you do not worry about the perfect campsite breakdown. You grab what you can, throw it in, and get out. I cannot say I blame him. There is a point where curiosity becomes foolish. Maybe it really was a person with some kind of unusually steady light. Maybe it was a drone, though depending on when and where this happened, that may not fit. Maybe it was a vehicle or equipment somewhere beyond what he could see. Maybe there was some optical illusion caused by darkness and distance. Maybe the ground was not as rough as it looked. There are always explanations people can offer when they are not the ones standing there alone at night, watching the light come closer. But from his position, all he knew was that a light had responded to his flashes, matched him exactly, and then started heading directly toward him in a way that did not match the land between them. That is enough reason to leave. The idea of it still bothers me because of how deliberate it feels. If the light had simply appeared and drifted around, it would be strange. If it had only flashed back randomly, it could be coincidence. If it had only moved toward him like a person walking, it might be unsettling, but explainable. But it did all the wrong things in the right order. It answered him first. It showed awareness. Then it began approaching. Then it moved too smoothly, as if whatever was carrying it was not touching the ground at all. And he never saw who or what was behind it. That unknown part is what makes the story so creepy. A light can hide a lot. It can blind you to the shape behind it. It can make distance hard to judge. It can make something seem closer or farther away than it really is. And in total darkness, a single moving light becomes the whole world. You stare at it because there is nothing else to look at, but the longer you stare, the less you know. I wonder what would have happened if he had stayed. Would the light have stopped at the edge of camp? Would a person have finally stepped into view and laughed? Would someone have said they were just messing with him? Or would the light have kept coming until it was right in front of him, still with no body visible behind it? That is the question that makes the story stick. Sometimes the scariest part of leaving is not knowing what you avoided. But sometimes not knowing is better. He got in his truck and got the hell away from there. That was probably the smartest thing he could have done. There is no campsite, no gear, no pride, and no curiosity worth waiting for something like that to reach you. In the woods at night, when your instincts tell you something is wrong, you listen. A light in the distance is one thing. A light that copies you is another. A light that comes straight toward you over rough ground without swaying, bobbing, stumbling, or showing any sign of a person behind it is something else entirely. I do not know what he saw that night. Maybe it was human. Maybe it was some strange trick of light and terrain. Maybe there is a perfectly normal answer that would make the whole thing less frightening if we knew it. But if I had been there, alone in the dark, watching that smooth light come toward me after it had copied my flashes, I would have done exactly what he did. I would have thrown my stuff into the truck and left. Because some things do not need to be solved up close.